Hello, human geographers. We are back at it again this evening. Tonight, we will be discussing spatial concepts, which is how we describe where things are located and why they're located there. Tonight, we'll pack in a ton of vocabulary terms, so buckle up. Write down those questions for anything you're unclear on, and we can discuss those things back in class. We'll start with how to describe where things are located in space. Typically, the phrase we use is distribution, which is the organization of something across Earth's surface. You'll hear questions like, describe the spatial distribution of Christians around the world, or what is the distribution of the world's largest cities? Essentially, you're being asked to talk about the organization of these phenomena. And there are three components to help describe the organization of something. They are density, concentration, and pattern. Density is the frequency with which something exists within a given unit of area. Density is the number of something. So high density means there's a lot of something. And low density means there's a low number of something within a given area. Concentration, you may recall from an earlier lecture, but concentration is the spread of something over a given area. This is the relationship of items to one another. So high concentration means they are very close together, what we call clustered. And low concentration means they're further apart or dispersed. Finally, we have pattern, which is the geometric, linear, or irregular alignment of something in a study area. This allows us to describe if something is aligned into a geometric shape, a line, or without a specific pattern. But pattern kind of has a dual meaning that you may hear, and that is a pattern of association. Are two phenomena related to one another and thus show a similar pattern. For example, where are grapes grown? They're grown in regions that generally have hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters. We see this climate around the Mediterranean Sea in countries like Spain, France, and Italy. But we see a similar pattern associated with climate in California, Chile, South Africa, and Western Australia. There isn't a geometric or linear pattern, but there is a pattern associated with climate that produces similarities. But let's practice in describing spatial distribution. We've got three classroom setups with different number and alignment of desks. Which classroom has the highest density of desks? Is it A, B, or C? Which ones have lower density? What about concentration? Which would you say are more clustered? And which would you say are more dispersed? And finally, let's talk about alignment when we look at pattern. Is there a geometric pattern in this classroom alignment? How about linear? Now, where's the irregular alignment? Now that we know how to describe where things are located, let's discuss the difference between two themes of geography related to space. Location is the position that something occupies on Earth's surface and can be described in absolute or relative terms. Absolute location is the precise spot where something is, and we typically use latitude and longitude to describe the exact position of an object or feature. Longitude is a series of meridians that run between the north and south poles, but measure east and west of the prime meridian. Latitude are parallels to the equator and measure north and south. GPS can be especially helpful in pinpointing the absolute location using latitude and longitude, including the subdivisions of each degree into minutes and seconds.
Relative location means the position of something or someone in relation to other places or features. Before smartphones, we often gave directions based on relative location. For example, drive over the train tracks, turn right at the McDonald's. Then I lived at the third house on the right. Could you find my childhood home based on the directions I just gave you? Probably not, because you don't know which train tracks or McDonald's I'm referring to. But if I gave you the latitude and longitude of my childhood home down to the minute and second, you'd probably be able to find it pretty quickly, given the technology that we have now. The importance of relative location is often impacted by connectivity and accessibility. Connectivity refers to how well locations are tied together, while accessibility is how quickly or easily people can interact with people in another location. This leads us nicely into the concept of place, which emphasizes how a location takes on meaning and value to individual people. This can be due to human characteristics like language, architecture, religion, population density, and quality of life. It can also include a location's physical features like climate, water sources, as well as plant and animal life. Think about your favorite place, the one that you sent me a picture of at the beginning of the school year. Why is that your favorite place? Why is it significant to you? What human and physical characteristics make it significant? I would probably write that example and its characteristics in your notes because it represents the difference between a location and a place. And relative location can influence a place's significance. For example, features like trade routes, political associations, and economic and cultural connections to other places help to determine how important a particular place is.
Our final characteristic to help us understand the meaning of a place is its toponym, which is the name given to a portion of Earth's surface. Place names help to establish the unique character of a place and describe what is important in that area. That's why so many places in the United States are named for Washington or Lincoln. It's why many places that were colonized by the Spanish show the influence of the Spanish language, like Las Vegas, which means the meadows in Spanish, or the importance of the Catholic religion, like San Diego, which means Saint Diego. So now that we understand the position something occupies and why it may be important, let's begin to examine how people, their ideas, goods, and culture move. This is known as diffusion. Diffusion is the process of spreading a feature or trend from one place to another over time. People, ideas, and goods begin in one place called the hearth, which is the region from which innovative ideas or cultural traits originate. For example, these are considered the hearths of ancient culture, places in the Middle East, East and South Asia, Central America, and West Africa. And these ancient hearths of culture were also where agriculture and urbanization originated as well. That is a pattern of association. Why do you think these three concepts, agriculture, culture, and city life, began in similar areas? Make a hypothesis. But knowing where something began and that it moved or diffused from there doesn't tell us how it diffused. There are different ways that a feature or trend will spread from place to place over time. The two major types of diffusion are relocation diffusion and expansion diffusion. Relocation diffusion is the spread of a feature or trend through bodily movement of people from one place to another. Something is in a new place because someone moved it there. Expansion diffusion, on the other hand, is the spread of an innovation or an idea through a population in an area in such a way that the number of those influenced grows continuously larger, resulting in an expanding area of dissemination. It is expanding. This means that it diffuses to include more people rather than just being in a new location. But how does it expand to more people? There are three types of expansion diffusion. Contagious diffusion is the rapid, widespread diffusion of a feature or trend throughout a population by contact from person to person. Hierarchical diffusion is the spread of a feature or trend from one key person or node of authority or power to other persons or places. Think of a pyramid. The node of authority is at the top and expands that concept to those below them. And the least common and perhaps most confusing for students is stimulus diffusion, which is a form of diffusion in which a cultural adaptation is created as a result of the introduction of a cultural trait from another place. So stimulus diffusion is when something expands but changes slightly as it diffuses. Here's a quick visual guide to remember the different types of diffusion. I would draw or screenshot this for your notes. So now that we know the organization and definition of each type of diffusion, let's provide some examples. Feel free to add additional examples of your own that we can discuss in class. The Columbian Exchange was the movement of crops, livestock, and disease from the Old World, Europe, Africa, and Asia, to the New World, the Americas, and vice versa. For example, the hearth of potatoes was in South America. They originated in South America, but they were moved to Europe, Africa, and Asia through relocation diffusion. But again, this is about movement. These crops moved to a new spot through relocation diffusion. But then other forms of diffusion may begin to act on them. Take disease for an example. New diseases were brought to the New World. That's relocation diffusion because it's in a new spot. But as soon as they begin infecting more people, we also have to talk about contagious diffusion. Disease spreads to the next person through contact. This is why we had the discussion of density and concentration, because areas that are more dense or more clustered tend to see these phenomena move more quickly. We've all had experience with reducing contagious diffusion because of COVID. If we reduce contact, if we avoid clustering, we can slow down the spread of this virus. So disease is a great example of contagious diffusion. Hierarchical diffusion is when an idea leapfrogs people. A social media influencer or celebrity who says or wears something, which is then adopted by all of their followers, is a good example of hierarchical diffusion. The more connected you are, the more quickly you access and adopt their concept. That is hierarchical diffusion. So fashion is actually another example of hierarchical diffusion. Finally, stimulus diffusion is when something spreads, but adjust to local tastes or demands. Perhaps the most clear example is the spread of surfing. When you surf, you stand on a board, balance while riding on water. You may do tricks, or if you're like me, you fall down a lot. But then someone wants to do the same thing on sidewalks, so you get skateboarding. And then you want to do the same thing on snow, so you get snowboarding. You keep the underlying principle, but adapt it slightly. You may have noticed that I didn't provide any examples for expansion diffusion. That's because expansion diffusion is when something spreads while increasing to new people, but it doesn't explain how it spreads. Contagious, hierarchical, and stimulus describe how it expands. So those are more specific ways to describe how it is spreading and expanding. There are many factors that impact the diffusion or flow of people, goods, and information. Factors could be economic, social, political, or cultural in nature. And the flow of people, goods, and information have several important effects as well. It is an established geographic principle that things that are closer together are more related, and interaction decreases the farther apart they are. This is known as the concept of distance decay. Distance decay is defined as the diminishing in importance and eventual disappearance of a phenomenon with increasing distance from its origin. As distance increases, a place becomes less accessible because it is more expensive and takes more time. This cost and time component is known as the friction of distance. And friction of distance causes distance decay. With greater friction, there will be less interaction, and there will be greater friction at greater distances. Essentially, here's what you need to know. With increasing distance, there will be less interaction. But distance is becoming less important because as the world becomes more interconnected, it is becoming functionally smaller. The absolute distance between two places may have changed very little over the last 250 years, but the relative distances have changed dramatically. This is called time-space compression, which is the reduction in the time it takes to diffuse something to a distant place as a result of improved communication and transportation systems. Previously, we had letters that were transported by ships or by horseback. Now we have the internet and jet travel. Because of these improvements, the world feels smaller. Just take a look at the difference in time it took to travel across the Atlantic. With the exception of John Glenn, who circled the entire world 3 times in just 5 hours. That is the difference between wind sail ships to steam-powered ships to airplanes and then space travel. So if distance decay dealt with the issue of accessibility, then time-space compression is all about connectivity. The more connected two places are, the shorter the relative distance between them. And as more places become more connected, as high-speed air travel, containerized shipping, and the internet make more places more connected, we're seeing the rise of globalization, which is the expansion of economic, political, and cultural processes to the point that they become global in scale and impact. Another definition that I like for globalization is it's about increasing interaction, deepening relationships, and accelerating interdependence. One of the major features of globalization is an acceleration of trade. That's part of what they mean when they said increasing interactions. We're talking about trade along with other interactions. Countries increasingly realize that they do not need to grow or produce everything that their people want or need. This is increased innovation as countries seek to improve the good that they can more effectively produce, while trading for the things they aren't able to produce as easily. Governments have increased the number of trade agreements that remove barriers to trade and make it easier for goods, ideas, and people to move across international borders. And this has opened up some relatively closed political systems around the world. At the same time, there are issues associated with globalization. Some have argued that the benefits of globalization are unevenly distributed, with richer countries and even richer individuals within countries benefiting more than poorer areas. As countries seek to mass produce specific goods to ship out to global markets, there have been negative effects on the environment. Resources are depleted more quickly, and the physical environment may not get the rest it needs to remain productive over a long period of time. And with cultural globalization, we're seeing traditional economies and cultural practices fade from existence. More people speak English than ever before, but fewer young people are learning ancestral languages. Is that good? Is it bad? That often depends on one's perspective. In an increasingly globalized world, we enjoy many benefits, but must deal with new and increasing issues as well. And that's where we'll end for tonight. Have a good evening, everyone. I'll see you back in class.